every time I see someone new or I haven't seen in a while, they go, last time I saw you, you're about this tall, you were chubby, because I used to be really chubby, and they always would say, and you look exactly like your dad. My mom says how I picked up a lot of his mannerisms just without him being there, just kind of like a hereditary trait or something like that.
And he acts just like him. Like the way I see him interact with my daughter was exactly the same way that Jimmy would interact with me.
It's like Narnia.
You just watch so many of the things that he wanted to do with his life at that young age were all a carbon copy of what his dad had done, was doing.
I mean, since I was a kid, I remember even telling my dad I wanted to be a winemaker, and that was more, I guess, to make him proud, to have that sort of connection with something that big. Like even that young, I kind of understood it. But I mean, recently I've been thinking I want to do something else and then go to winemaking. I mean, Janie always says you don't have to go into that if you don't want to.
Because if he stayed on that track where everything was just like Dad, I don't know that his heart would have been in it if he said he wanted to be a winemaker. So I've been watching for cues over the years of him doing his own thing.
I mean, there are definitely moments when I think I don't want to do this, and then there are more moments when I'm like, I really want to do this.
Wine in America is young. We don't have families that have made wine for a dozen generations, or vineyards first planted by the Romans. But we still have a common thread. Unlike Pascal Brooks, most Americans aren't born into the industry. But like his father Jimmy, they are pioneers who discovered wine in the unexplored parts of themselves. And for most, before they abandoned a career, mortgaged a house, maxed out a credit card, their stories began with an epiphany, a precise moment when they understood that every bottle of wine contains a little bit of magic.
Wine people always talk about epiphany wines. This one bottle that will say blew the top of our heads off. And for me, I would say, and I've had lots of those kind of bottles, but the first one, easy to remember. It's like the first time you have sex. You're never going to forget it. It's imprinted in your brain cells and it's there forever. 91 Forest Springs Reserve. There's a wine that not only touched my soul, it caressed my soul. It made love to me. And I was like, oh man, I had all these flavors and things going on, and it was changing all the time.
The real epiphany was probably a bottle of 1959 Latache. And this was in 1969. And I had an out-of-body experience. It's the only way to describe it. When you have that magical bottle of Burgundy, I was 15 years old, but it was like nothing. It was transcendental. I have never imagined having anything that you could drink or eat or taste that was like that.
I remember the wine. It was a bottle of 1998 Viader, and I was walking around and sipping on it. I was upstairs putting the kids to bed, and I had the glass of wine with me, and I took a sip at the top of the stairs and then the bottom of the stairs and into the kitchen, and I was still tasting this wine, and it was changing and getting more interesting.
I remember when I was a kid, my dad would give me wine and a lot of water to dilute it, and I always felt like an adult. So I think I understand it more, and by the time I get to 21, I think I'll have a deeper appreciation than most people do.
My family was from Europe, And so we always had wine at a meal, almost every meal. And of course, as a kid, I might have had just a sip or whatever and mixed with water.
I grew up with wine just being ever present. It was always on the table, and you were expected to be able to talk about what you tasted. So in France, we made home wine, and it was really earthy, barnyard, this really funky smelling and tasting wine. It was a style that we were making in the garage, and we weren't winemakers. I come to the States and I have California wine for the first time in Washington, D.C., and was awed.
It was junior year, I'm pretty sure. Mike invited me over for a glass of wine, and he opened this bottle of, pretty sure it was 1979 Jordan Cab. And I remember saying, wow.
The other thing that was life-changing at that point was just having a little, just ordinary wine shop, you know, on the block where my apartment building was, and just wandering in and buying, you know, a $5 bottle of wine from Portugal, or what was the wine I loved at the time? It was Rufino Libaio, which was like this Italian stainless steel Chardonnay, which was like $10 at the time.
You know, but I just remember, you know, tasting, you know, like my first Alsatian white and being amazed, you know, at how different it was from everything else that I'd been drinking, you know, before that.
There was this really exciting moment of, I've got to find out where this comes from. Like, this is so different than what I know.
Every layer I uncovered, it became more interesting and more intriguing. Became something that I felt like, you know, I could learn about for the rest of my life.
You get it into your system and you're willing to make this leap of faith, which is crazy by most standards. I mean, you think about someone who's, let's say, literally a rocket scientist, who's now making wine. I mean, stops everything, just starts their life anew without any other kind of, again, without that safety net. I think there's something in the American spirit, that pioneering spirit.
It just got more and more kind of complex, to the point where I realized that it was something I needed to pursue. It was just such a compelling thing. I couldn't really ignore it any longer.
And so you say, well, how do you build enough kind of confidence to be able to do it? Well, you don't have 100% confidence, but it doesn't matter. You just have to do it. See, that's the thing a lot of people don't understand, is that it's not like you really have a choice to do it anyway. You don't have a choice. Once you get that bit by the bug, the choice isn't yours anymore. You have to do it.
Jimmy Brooks discovered wine while he was searching for something else. On the run from American consumerism, he explored Africa and Eastern Europe before finding his vocation in the vineyards of France. He returned to his native Oregon, determined to make wine using ancient farming practices, a system known as biodynamics, and to make Riesling in the Alsatian style from the old vine vineyards in danger of being ripped out to make room for more lucrative varieties. Like anyone who cuts against the grain, he had his skeptics, but by 2004, his small wine business was just starting to gain attention.
We were only one grade apart, so we had a lot of similar friends and overlapped over the years, both in his grade and my grade. And by high school, you know, I would date his friends and he would date mine, and that always added a lot of extra interesting controversy to the family.
He was actually dating my sister. That's how I met him. And my sister started telling me about, oh yeah, I met this really interesting guy I'm working with, and said, yeah, you should meet and talk.
To me, you know, Jim was just a friend that I would eat and drink with and go out and, you know, occasionally carouse around.
We kind of hit it off right away. I think we had the same sort of sense of kind of dark sense of humor, irreverent dark sense of humor, and just interest in what we thought was kind of obscure, you know, like Russian history, you know, obscure communist poets.
I started working in junior high so that I could earn money and shop. He wrote a lot. He wrote an awful lot. poetry, really into music.
I think is probably more than we talked about winemaking and grapes, and we talked more about philosophy and human interaction issues and historical things and political things.
I really wanted to go to USC, and I got into USC, but I didn't want my parents to spend that kind of money. So I chose to go to ASU, which was a lot less expensive. And Jimmy went to Southern Oregon to play football, and then after 2 years there, he decided to go to Linfield and finish, and it took him 3 years. And I was always like, I couldn't believe that he would have my parents pay for him to go to school there for 3 years and then not know what he wanted to do for a living. I had my job secured the October before I graduated. You know, when he finished and just hadn't even thought about a career and what he wanted to do, and then packed up and moved to Europe. You know, he would get tired of things here, and I don't know really where that came from, because I always thought things here were just fine. But he definitely wanted to get out of the US for a number of years, and really found a lot of different opportunities over there that he didn't think he could find over here.
He'd call me up every fall and say, oh, you got to get over here, it's beautiful, you know, it's the wine, the women, all this stuff, it's fantastic. And I got so tired of hearing that I finally said, okay, I'm going to go over there and see what it's all about.
I always felt like I was the one that my mom wanted to talk about at the country club. And it was harder for her to talk about Jimmy because she didn't understand.
Their attitude was Americans, all they want to do is come over here and drink wine and chase women, which is somewhat true, but we were also hard workers. And so I think, you know, Jimmy got there and they gave him some of the dirtiest jobs to do, and he performed really well.
He was always kind of reserved, and maybe that was around Janie and I, because we were both kind of status quo, going the way coming out of college, go to college for 4 years, get a job, and toe the straight line.
A lot of times I get 10-page letters from him, about his thoughts and hopes. You could see that his first experience in France got him on that track. And in all his letters, especially when he was going back to work at the Domaine de Champs, or when he was going to come back to America, it was all kind of focused on well, this is what I want to do. This is what I really am passionate about, and this is what I want to happen in my life. And
then when he came back to the States, he started working in a winery, and to be honest with you, I was kind of like, yeah, okay, don't want to get a real job and work in a winery.
And I remember visiting him there, and he had just started Brooks that year, and was talking to him about how, what classes did you take? What books do you use? And it was none of that, and which was really hard for me to understand, how there weren't recipes or formulas, or because I would have needed that.
So it did surprise me, not so much that he learned how to make wine, but how big of a presence he had in that community. I just never envisioned him as the type of person that would be commanding other people's attention. And just that part blew me away.
So when I got into the industry, it was really through more of a passion for him. I really liked him as a person. He was a great boss. Everything I was learning was from Jimmy, so it was really about feeding off of his passion for what he was doing.
I think Jimmy represents that sort of third wave of kind of young punk winemakers of the late 90s, early 2000s, who came in and just had so much energy and so much passion, and they wanted to shake things up.
He and I had a great relationship in that we always started friendly, we always ended friendly and patting each other on the back and giving each other advice. And in between we could also hit points where we're saying that's bullshit. And it's good to have friends that way. That's almost the definition of a friend.
This guy has so much charisma and so much passion. I mean, he was like this giant, oversized elf, and he just had this twinkle in his eye, and whatever he said, people just lapped it up.
I think everyone knows each other, I guess in this, it's a not that big of an industry, but I guess at least what was surprising to me is that he really did know everybody, you know, not just in a kind of superficial way. I think he helped draw a lot of people together, and I think, you know, that's part of his gift, I think, for us. You know, it's like there's a lot of good friends that are friends because of Jimmy. You know, he was kind of the magnet and the cement, you know, at the same time.
I didn't know what he was doing in wine, neither did Janie really, right? He kept saying, I'm doing this, and we were like, yeah, okay. Learn later.
We always laugh that we'd just get, you know, a case now and again that he'd ship to us, but really had no understanding of what he was building or what he was doing and why it was different, and no idea.
I remember interviewing Jimmy, it must have been 2002, about Riesling. He was so passionate and so enthusiastic that people would just follow him.
He had a really great passion for Riesling. Used to be very largely planted in Oregon, but for quite a few years they started tearing it out, so there wasn't near as much old vine Riesling left, and he just felt like old vine Riesling was, you know, it really adds a special character to the wine.
I think early on, even before Jimmy left for Europe, I mean, we had an interest in wine, and there was a place called the Vat in Tonsor here in town, and we loved that place. And I remember we just would, you know, go in there and just open up this huge catalog of wine they'd have, and you know, we're oblivious. We don't know what we should have. And I do remember getting like an Alsatian Riesling. I remember like both of us kind of sitting there going, "Oh my God, this is amazing," you know. And I think that's, you know, might have been a kernel that got him thinking about, you know, Riesling in the future. We were just kind of both struck by, like, wow, this is so complex and flavorful and aromatic, and it's like we didn't want the bottle to go, you know. And I think we even tried to order another bottle of it, but that was it. That's all they had, you know. And I think we'd been on a search, I think, for that bottle.
There was a single Riesling that just basically turned the corner and, you know, opened up a whole new kind of like realm, and that's like I had to figure out how rather than just enjoy it. The 98 Dietrich Alsatian Riesling. The wine itself had almost no color, you know, but, you know, one sniff and just kind of the background disappeared, and I had realized that this was just so compelling, and it just kind of didn't release me after that. And I still believe that Riesling is probably, you know, the most versatile and, you know, underappreciated grape variety perhaps on the planet. But I think it's probably the greatest wine grape out there.
For Alan Baker, what began with a bottle of wine became an idea that he just couldn't shake. He would follow that impulse halfway across the country. At the age of 41, he quit his job and headed to California, leaving behind his home state of Minnesota and a 17-year career in public radio. He documented the process in a blog and podcast called The Cellar Rat.
I basically kind of hatched a plan that I just kept telling people about, to go sell everything, move to California, start over in the wine industry, and basically start from the bottom as a farmer and figure out if it works. I didn't really have the courage of my convictions initially, but I talked about it long enough that I basically got to the point where I had to do it, or I was going to look like an idiot. Hey there, Alan here, aka The Cellar Rat. Thanks for stopping by and snagging this, one of my first audio bits to come from my perhaps ridiculous plan to turn my life upside down and start over in wine country. Podcast number 3, number 6, Ratcast number 40. I use the microphone to get, you know, stick my nose into other people's business to figure out where I fit. This is about dreams. It's about the unknown, the unknowable future. It's about those stirrings deep inside that make us question where we are, who we are. You're not dreaming, however. It's Ratcast number 53. What is the journey? How to describe it? Well, I'm still figuring that out, actually, and others surely have taken similar journeys. Maybe
You are listening to this while you're on your own journey to find answers.
For Jimmy Brooks and Alan Baker, their journeys may have started with a single bottle of Riesling, but it led them down different paths. Mike Officer's first Riesling carried him to old vines of a different sort, leading him to produce some of the world's most sought-after Zinfandels. And Scott Wright left behind a dream career in Los Angeles to import great Burgundies and Champagnes while making his own small lots of fine Oregon Pinot Noir. If there's a recipe for making wine in America, there are two key ingredients: the capacity to dream and the courage to act upon it.
She asked me if I'd ever had a good wine, and I said, I don't know, aren't they all the same, you know? And she goes, well, try this. And she poured me a glass of something, and it was like ambrosia. I mean, I was floored by it, and I said, this isn't wine, is it? And she goes, yes, it is. And it was a 76 Chateau St. Jean late harvest Riesling. I kind of went through a midlife crisis early. Maybe it was a quarter-life crisis. I was 25 years old, and I was sitting at my desk one day writing code, and I thought, you know, if I'm not careful, I'm going to be 65 years old in front of a monitor and keyboard writing code. Started as a home winemaker in 1987. Did 100 pounds of fruit, which is roughly enough for a 5-gallon carboy. Eventually threw the wine out. It wasn't very good, but really discovered I really enjoyed the process and figured I needed to make more wine. We continued to produce more and more. We got up to 15 barrels in 1997, and that's when Kendall said, honey, I think it's time we fish or cut bait here. The day that I was going to give notice to my manager that I was quitting, Inc. magazine, Incorporated magazine, had done an article about me and how I'd used my salary as seed capital to get this other business going. And since my manager gets in late, I ran down stairs to the local newsstand, and there was the new issue. I picked up a copy and paid for it, ran outside, found the article. It was entitled, "Don't Quit Your Day Job." So I started panicking. It was an omen that I was supposed to keep working, you know, and I called my wife and told her about it, and she assured me that it would all be okay and go in and give notice, and so I did.
The first career, I was a radio disc jockey, and I was one of the lucky ones who was fortunate to have a really nice career in radio, and I made it to the top. I was a nationally syndicated radio personality. I was on in 350 markets around the country for a long time. And I had the opportunity to move into the actual music business end of things, and I became a marketing and promotion executive for a major record company, Epic Records, and worked very closely with Celine Dion and Pearl Jam and Michael Jackson and Ozzy Osbourne and all the major artists we had on our label at the time. Got to do some great projects with everybody from the Beatles to Britney Spears and everything in between. And working on the Britney Spears projects was finally got me to realize I needed to get the hell out of the business. The music industry, like many other industries around the same time, was going through huge amounts of consolidation, everything being bought up by 2 or 3 large multinational corporations, and the business became about squeezing every nickel to the bottom line for Wall Street every quarter. And while this was happening, I was getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the wine thing. One day I just realized I was spending more time doing wine-oriented stuff, whether it was going to auctions and buying wine, traveling to visit winemakers, tasting wine, cataloging my wine collection, going to wine tastings with other wine geeks in the industry, that I was doing more of that than I was doing my actual job. So I figured maybe that should tell you something. Maybe it's time to actually go do this. This is what your passion is really all about. I went to my partners. I said, I want to get out of here. I want to move up to Northern California, start a winery, and I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do something in the wine business, and they talked me out of it. So as a substitute for following my dream, I said, okay, well, if we're not going to do that, we're going to buy the big house at the top of the hill we always wanted in LA. So found this house we really loved. I got very sick because I was stressing out about all this. I had 103 fever for weeks, couldn't get out of bed. The doctors didn't know what was wrong. They tested me for Epstein-Barr syndrome and chronic fatigue and all this other stuff. And Basically, my doctor said one day, "Are you just really so upset about something that's going on in your life, or is there a decision you're wrestling with or something?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I wanted to go, you know, start a winery or something, and changed my mind and bought this house instead." He said, "Well," I said, "I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but maybe that's it." So driving home from that doctor's appointment is when I really had the realization, yes, I need to do this. He was right.
The people who were accountants and dentists and electricians and all that before, you know, maybe they were sitting at their desk thinking there's got to be more in life. How could I, you know, be outdoors and drink wine every day? I know, I'll be a winemaker. It'll be so easy.
I was a software developer.
Government jobs and corporate jobs.
I started a technology company.
Education-wise, I'm an accountant.
My plan was to go to law school.
Telecom and computer.
And decided that that probably wasn't what I wanted to do with my life.
Well, I worked for the telephone company.
High-tech industry.
My background is in physics and engineering.
I got interested in electronics.
So I'm an IT guy.
I was an at-home dad, taking care of 2 kids.
I was one of the very, very privileged few. I got to play a game for a living.
And I actually worked for a venture capital company.
I was recording music, I was a producer.
I think at the point in our careers we're like, okay, I'm grown up, I know I can do this. Now I want to do something else.
The smells that waft over you when you walk into a winery that's fermenting Pinot in the middle of harvest, there's nothing like it on the planet.
So, we've given up our lives to do this.
You know, if you're really fortunate, like I was, to play for a long time, you're still 35 years old when they tell you, "Hey man, you're over the hill, time to get out of here." And when you're 35, it's not time to just sit in the rocking chair or play golf every day. I needed something I was excited about every day. You know, I needed a business that really intrigued me. I've had some of my old football buddies, you know, they'll buy the wine just because they're going to support me, you know, and not just like I would support them. But then I'll get a text message or a phone call like, "Man, we had your wine at dinner. It's actually really good." I'm like, "Well, you know, thanks for the low expectations," you know.
A lot of the people that I worked with were not happy. It's kind of that corporate sweatshop sort of atmosphere where, like, you're educated people, you know, and you have degrees and you have a white-collar job. And part of the problem is that a lot of those jobs pay pretty well.
My father worked for IBM. You know, he hated it when I went to work in Burgundy. You know, he paid for my whole college, and to go see me squander away my life making $1,000 a month, he was furious. And then he came up to visit me at the Festival de Saint Vincent, which is the patron saint of wine in Burgundy. And each town has their own. There's one large festival, and then each town has its own festival. And we went to one of the small towns with a French friend of mine, and they carry the statue around the town, and it starts with a casse-croûte in the morning, and then it goes to a lunch that goes on, you know, all day. And at the end of that weekend, my dad left, and he said, "Don't ever do anything else. This is great."
I think I mailed letters out in, I don't know, it might have been September or October, and I said, "Hey, it's like I want to, you know, switch careers. I want to get into the wine business, and I'd like to, you know, work in a winery, and I'll be out in Oregon in March." And so I went to everyone I sent a letter to, and I think a couple of them actually remembered reading my letter, but, you know, and someone told me, it's like, "Well, like, we just throw those letters away."
You know, I always kind of daydreamed about doing something with wine. I used it as an escape. You know, when you're working in a cubicle or in an office, and you really don't want to be there sometimes.
I was transferred from Arizona to Oregon and fell in love with the state and the wine industry, and on weekends I'd go out to the wineries, and of course as soon as you fell in love with the place, they transferred you someplace else. And
you know, I imagine myself sitting under an olive tree, you know, drinking a glass of my wine.
So I kept on telling my friends, in my next life I'll just buy a winery and move back to Oregon, and decided why wait. So in '97 I took the plunge.
I made wine in the past, of course. It was in my garage and I couldn't sell it, and everybody I gave a bottle to loved it. But I don't know if they loved getting the free wine or they really loved my style of wine. I mean, but now this is the acid test, okay.
And so I yelled at Stuart a lot the first year. ruin the wine. And I remember other winemakers like stopped in the winery and just looked.
So I'm making this in my house in Phoenix, this Pinot Noir from Oregon. I flew back these 2 75-gallon coolers full of Pinot, making wine at home. And the guy says, well, where'd you get your grapes? And I said, oh, right across from Dick Erath's vineyard in Oregon. The guy goes, well, I'm really good friends with Dick Erath. And we started talking. He says, we should come help me out at the winery sometime. And so like I got the keys to the winery and I never left.
I asked him in 1965 he'd sell me some grapes. And he did. And so a friend and I picked about 800 pounds of Semillon on a Saturday morning. And that evening I was making wine. So it was decent, you know. I'm probably, at least by whatever my standards were then, you know. And then at that point, I just was off running. You couldn't stop me then. We just opened up the garage at the house and on weekends sent out notices to people we knew and come on by and taste the wine. And we'd take a card table and set up to fold out the legs and set it down and pour a little wine. And a bottle of wine was $5 or something. Thank you very much.
Dick Erath's obsession began through making homemade wine in California, but his sense of adventure led him to conduct research in hopes of finding something unique. What he learned was that the cool and rainy Willamette Valley in Oregon falls along the same latitudes as some of the great wine regions of France. When he defied the cynics and joined a handful of others to start making Oregon wine and selling it from his driveway, he was helping to found a world-class wine region that would grow into a nearly $3 billion a year industry. But for other pioneers of American wine, their discoveries were much more personal.
It was about age 14, 15 is when really then I wanted to go into winemaking school, and I had this very vivid dream that I was holding a glass, a wine glass, and was into the downtown of my village. But I had this dream I was in that very location in the village, and I had this glass in my hand, and as I was holding it, I just literally start taking off just with this glass, just going up, just go up in the air, and I remember that as a very particular moment, because then it's really when I started the walk into going to school, going to winemaking school. And before that, I wasn't really certain on what to do, and so that was a very particular moment that I very much remember.
See, it was a very foggy day and low-level clouds, and we really couldn't see where we were going. And I looked out the side window and I saw green. And before I could actually say, oh shit, he hit. And the gas tanks on the wings exploded, and fuel was in the cockpit. And we thought for sure we were gonna die. And you know, you just kept waiting for that second hit.
So it's like concrete, you know how you're dying. You've hit the last chapter of your book. And then I think my second reaction was kind of the anger, like I was too young to die, got ripped off. And then you accept it, and then you kind of go through the you wish.
As it turned out, the damage to the wings and the rudder was such that if we could hold that door open, him with his hands and me with my legs, we created a drag so that the pilot actually had a little bit, not much, maneuvering room.
Like I said, when it hits you, you're not thinking, oh, I should have made that meeting, oh, I wish I would have made an extra buck here. That's never even in your mind. That's not there. It's the family and the people you love, and it's, I want to tell them that.
We spent about 30 minutes in the air before we got the plane down, and had a lot of time to think about what we would do different. And so shortly after that incident, I sold the company, and we started looking for a place to put in a vineyard and a winery.
One of the things that attracted me to wine is that you can, in a single subject, study geography, history, agriculture, botany, you know, even art and literature, music, whatever you want to, whatever you love, you can bring it to wine, and it always comes back to that. It's an industry of permanence, and it matters, it means something. We were talking earlier about why do people come to this mid-career. Maybe they're having a sort of an existential moment and they're wondering, why am I here on this planet? Maybe I need to produce something that will make the rest of the world happy and something that has permanence. They're making something lasting. And it's not something that will be consumed and go away. You know, you can hold on to wine in your cellar for decades. It's something that will always be there, and you can pass on your business to your children. You plant your vines and they stay in the ground for decades.
Jimmy loved Pascal a lot, and I think you could see this kind of, you know, I think he wrapped it up in this whole image of, you know, I've got a winery and I've got this life, and, you know, I'm going to pass it on to my son. I mean, I think he had this real kind of big vision of his life and how Pascal, you know, was going to fit into it.
I would bump into him at coffee shops in Portland or something, and Pascal would be with him, and it was always great high-fiving.
We were at a wine tasting, and he was selling his wine in the corner of it. And I remember this girl my age walked by. I'm like, Dad, let me pour it, like, because I thought that impressed someone. I wasn't really aware of what impressed women.
We'd roast a whole animal, so, you know, we'd have a goat on the spit or a lamb, and I just, you know, remember those with Pascal as like a little kid in camouflage, playing in the dirt.
I mean, like, imagine like a 6-year-old walking around like a huge raving party where everyone's drunk and eating. I mean, people would be like horrified just to hear that, but for me it was normal life. I knew what to do. It wasn't like my dad cared for me, and there wasn't anything dangerous for me there. It was just me. It was just his way of showing appreciation for everyone and me at that same time.
What he was teaching Pascal, I think, was really amazing. Like, you know, we used to joke that he was like the littlest gourmand. You know, he'd sit there and he'd taste something, and he'd have like these complete adult observations about food, and you know, I think Jimmy would have him like smell the wine.
I love how he kind of taught me, I don't want to say how to live, but like just for a father to say I love you to their son, like a lot, and then see the other world, like where parents show no emotion to their kids, even though the feeling of love is kind of under there.
Definitely had that nomad side to him. Having a son, I think, put him in a position where he needed something a little bit more stable, and that's when he got into the wine industry. But I don't know that I would have thought that he would have stayed in it.
I never really thought ill of him, but I always kind of felt, because my parents were divorced, and I always felt very disconnected, even though he tried very hard to make a connection with me. He called me every morning before I went to school just to talk to me and all that, but it was always hard for me to connect, even like after he was gone. I remember just being with him and then wanting to be with my mom, and being with my mom and wanting to be with him, and it was always that big confusion.
Another thing, you know, that Jimmy said, you know, more than once is that he really didn't have anything to leave to Pascal besides the winery, and that was his legacy for his son.
Jimmy Brooks was hardly the first American to wander Europe and return obsessed with starting a wine business. More than 200 years earlier, Thomas Jefferson toured the vineyards of France and took notes. He planted vines on the slopes of Monticello. With an Italian patriot named Filippo Mazzai, he established the first commercial vineyards in the Commonwealth. But while he never succeeded in harvesting a single vintage, he planted the seeds of a national obsession. Now, vineyards dot the red Virginia soil, and wine is grown and made in the least likely corners of every state in the Union, from deserts to frozen prairies, and even a cool and rainy valley in the Northwest. When pioneers learn that something's never been done before, they don't hear it as a caution. They take it up as a challenge.
So under extreme conditions, you're fighting all fronts. Fighting disease, you're fighting, vines growing out of control.
The main challenge is that you are dealing with Mother Nature, and so you never know what she's going to come up with, right?
It's nerve-wracking, man, I'll be honest, knowing that Mother Nature ultimately has her hands on the reins far more than you do.
Last year, we had a devastating hailstorm in mid-August. And folks would think like the lack of water would be our problem, but our problem is too much water during ripening. And this monsoon season comes and we get all our water during the time when we're trying to ripen fruit.
Twig borers that were living in the walnut trees, but now the walnut trees were gone, and they said we got to get into something else, so they attacked the grapevines. And then, so they made all these holes into the little tiny shoots. Then a silver thaw came, the ice loaded up on them, broke them off. So by the time you got to frost, you got the broken off vines. Plus the deer came in and mowed me to the ground.
We have nets that we put around the vineyard, and then we have nets that we put on the top of the vines, because beside the deer there are birds and a raccoon. And actually it's interesting that this kind of trellis is a sort of a highway for the raccoon to go through the vineyard, because the mother jump on the first post with all the babies and they eat the grapes and they go. We have seen them doing that, right?
You come in knowing that potentially, once a decade, you're going to get hit by an early freeze or have a particularly cold year.
So I think figuring out how to grow vines here is the biggest challenge,
Reaction was you don't know what you're doing, and you just can't grow them here.
Pursuing a dream, you just persevere. You just take it as another setback, but it's nothing it's not an end all.
If we have a vintage that is not to the caliber or to the quality that we think we deem is sufficient to guarantee our octanol label, well, then that vintage we just skip.
You always know that somewhere out there on the horizon there may be that crazy year where you can't make double back because you're not going to put your name on some crappy wine.
We cut all the fruit off and put it on the ground and didn't make a wine that year because that gap will always, that'll tell the story of that year.
Make a product that has a different story, because people want to hear a story.
That's one of the things I sort of like about the Arizona situation, because it's like Oregon 30 years ago down there, and so I can sort of live that over again when I do spend time down there.
It's funny that we are trying to compete with the world, but this is the reality of trying to make the best you can.
I mean, they said, seriously, you're not doing this. And you say to them, come out and see the vineyard.
The acidity levels here are much higher than what I've been used to in California. And I thought, well, this is going to be a big problem. And it turns out it's not a problem, it's an asset. The acidity is the backbone, like the skeleton that the fruit of the wine hangs onto.
Actually, when I started this, I thought like, oh, we'll do this. Like, we'll make this
you know, I'll get into this and I will make like the best wine we can make from Arizona. Now it's like, if I can pass my kid a fully planted, healthy vineyard with what I think are the best varieties I've figured out, he'll probably do it. One of those two, or both of them, or maybe their kids.
When it comes to wine, America has had its ups and downs, but it's always had promise. The first European explorers found so many grapes they called the new country Vinland. In the early years, the industry struggled to gain a foothold, fought through disease, and was devastated by prohibition. But it's come roaring back. Now, America produces more than 750 million gallons a year. A quarter of that is sold by E&J Gallo of California. At the other end of the spectrum is Jim Day, who just may have the smallest commercial production facility in the neighboring state of Oregon.
The facility is 598 square feet. Inside it really is sort of made up of a double garage here. So it's a bonded facility, produce about 250 cases a year here. One challenge is the neighbors. I mean, you want to be on good terms with your neighbors. I can attend to the wine much more carefully, I think, and that helps. I think it helps with the quality.
I think what continues to motivate me is that, you know, I'm doing something that is pushing the envelope and something that I think is going to change part of the industry here in Missouri on what type of grapes are grown.
We finally got some acceptance that the wines were okay, you know, and then the next, you know, volley that was thrown at you was like, well, they won't. How do we know they're going to age? You know, so now we've proved that. So I think we're there.
Growing up in Walla Walla, we had two things we were famous for. We had a penitentiary and we had sweet onions, neither of which were very cool. So now having this wine thing happening in Walla Walla, where some of the best wines in the world are coming from our little valley, makes it a lot cooler.
We're established. Maybe we're not as known, but I mean, I don't really care about that. I mean, I know I can make world-class wine here. Some people will find out, some people will not. That's okay.
If the goal were purely financial, you know, if we're looking like how can we make the most money, and the vehicle for doing that would be, you know, making wine, then yeah, we wouldn't be here.
But I think when you look at your end product, I wouldn't have it any other way.
I'm smiling, laughing, whatever, because I think Jefferson was ready to sell wine to the French, you know, 200 years ago. We are not there yet, but we are going in that direction.
First time I was coming back since my parents died 4 years before. Like Jimmy and I saw each other, but I couldn't go to Oregon. I just couldn't handle going up there. And I was going for 3 weeks, and that third week was the International Pinot Noir celebration. And he was participating for the first time, and he was having this big party, paella party at his house afterwards. After about the second week, I got so stressed out because it was just emotional. It was too emotional to see all my parents' friends. I decided to go home, and didn't understand how substantial being a part of IPNC was for Jimmy, and he wanted to show that to me and to share that with me. We always talked on Sunday nights. That was always kind of our time to talk. And we missed a couple weeks in there because he was mad at me. But then the Sunday before he died, we talked for like an hour and a half, and everything was great again. But yeah, I can't, it was I don't know, it was a bad day.
we fell out of touch.
It never crossed my mind that I would lose him. And I'm very grateful that we had that conversation the week before he passed away.
Now and where our souls run free, I and you and you and me. Now and where our souls run free, through azure fields of energy. Now and where our souls run free.
It was a Saturday, and I was driving in to do some work on my space. I was painting and working on plumbing and things like that, and I stopped by Jimmy's house to get coffee, and the ambulances were outside.
What happened next, or what did you do next?
I walked up to the door, and Jimmy was laying on the kitchen floor. He's dead.
I got a call from Tad Sustad, and we were, good friends. In fact, I was with Tad last night, eating and drinking, doing exactly what we were just talking about. Yeah, he said, oh, Jimmy's had a heart attack, and I thought, oh my God, So I decided, well, what hospital is he in? I just thought, he had always had a heart attack. He's, in the hospital. I said, no, he's dead.
Called Lee, called Christian, and then that was kind of like the phone tree, and everyone started calling each other, and probably by, lunchtime, there was a pretty good group of people at Jimmy's house.
My wife and I were offloading some cows that Jimmy and my wife and I were splitting, and we had a pasture that we had leased, and so we were, we were offloading 3 cows and kept calling him, wondering where he was, because he was supposed to come meet us and help with the cows. And eventually we found out obviously that he had passed away that morning.
It was, like I said, right before harvest, a beautiful day like this, cool, sunny day, and I just was shocked by it. And so I dropped what I was doing and drove out there.
It's one of those things, you know where you were when Kennedy was shot, you know where you were when whatever. I know where I was when I heard that Jimmy Brooks had died that morning. I was on a trip back to Portland from an extended marketing trip, and it was very crushing.
I think the hard part about that, in respects to our business, was like things were just starting to turn for all of us. I think the early years are always a struggle, probably for everybody, but for Jimmy, 2003, I think we were all just starting to hit our stride. And that was, it's just, I guess it is what it is, it can't be changed.
The day that he passed away, I left here and got up to Oregon, and didn't get to his house till like 10 o'clock that night, but it was filled, jam-packed with people, most of which I didn't know. I obviously knew Pascal and his mom and a couple people, but I hadn't been to Oregon very many times and really hadn't seen him in that environment often. And this man approached me and he said, we need to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I went into the living room, and there's this whole group all seated waiting to talk to me.
And I still remember that when we met her, we were all at Jimmy's house, and she just sort of showed up, and we said, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get through harvest.
So several of us said, let's make it for Jimmy. He'd want us to do this.
It was a whole group of winemakers who said that they had figured out over the course of the day who was going to take all his different fruit, because harvest was in a couple weeks, and that they wanted to make his wine for free, and that what he was doing was wonderful, and they thought it should keep going, but they couldn't possibly do all the business side of it, and so they asked if I would help. And I guess, a couple of them knew I had a business background, and I said yes because I didn't know what else to say.
As far as being friends go, once someone's dead, there's really nothing you can do for them, but you can do things for their family.
I was very taken aback, and I remember thinking, who are these people, and why would they do this? because they all make wine too, and why would they want to help us so much? I couldn't understand. It took me a while to understand why they would want to help us so much.
And I remember at Jimmy's service, it was up at the vineyard, and then we all went down to his house, and a lot of restaurants brought food, and there were fire dancers and all that, and we had his Unimog, which is a big military truck. We were sitting in the back of the Unimog, and I remember saying to Janie, you know, do you understand now? Do you see that this is how important Jimmy was to all of us?
We all got together to make certain that Jimmy wasn't forgotten, and we realized that he wouldn't have ever been forgotten.
The first thing was that here's all these people coming out for Jimmy, you know, and having I don't know, help. There must have been, I don't know, 150, 200 people at his funeral, and then the celebration afterwards that was at his house, and that was where you kind of recognize, okay, well, I didn't recognize or know him. I didn't know that guy.
He was smarter than I was. Like, I thought I had the whole thing figured out, but it was so logical, and it wasn't about passion and heart and experience and people and places. He turned out just fine, you know, and had a lot more fun on the way in a lot of senses than I did in the path that I chose.
In order to get into wine, you have to have this curiosity about all aspects of the world. You have to be kind of a Renaissance person, interested in biology and horticulture and chemistry, and at the same time, art and poetry. I mean, you can't make great Pinot without being a bit of an artist. The people who get into winemaking do tend to be sort of dreamy, and they're always interesting to speak to. They're always thinkers. I don't think I've ever had a boring conversation with a winemaker. Our economy, nowadays, it just consists of a bunch of numbers on a computer screen. But now you meet someone who makes something real with their hands and you say, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And it's like they're fighting the good fight.
I had a savings, you know, so my small life savings, and you know, it was either enough to put a down payment on a house and buy a house or start the business. And I chose to start the business. And right about that same time, the relationship that I had at that point ended because of that.
And about 2 months later, after the newness wore off, I realized, you know, I'd uprooted myself from really, you know, all my support network in Minnesota. I didn't have the music community or the arts community or the public radio folks around me, and you know, the landscape was totally different, and it was a huge shock. I had really no idea going into it what a real adjustment it would be.
It was rough, you know, to have my income drop to 20% of what it was, you know, for quite some time.
You risk everything. You risk being out on the street. I mean, what are you going to do if you don't get sales? What are you going to do if you fail? How do you explain that to people? It's scary.
I'm very cautious and conservative by nature, so you know, making that step from a very comfortable, well-paying, you know, software engineering job to doing something on your own, yeah, it was frightening.
I remember the wine account getting down to $2. At one point, and just we had taken out a loan from my parents, gotten a loan from his parents. We took out loans from both of our 401ks. Every time I'd get a credit card that said I could write myself a loan, I would.
I didn't have any collateral. I had nothing, you know, and a pretty meager income, and a young business that was hemorrhaging. money. It was very discouraging to work 80 hours a week for years in a row and just go backwards financially.
I projected 7 years before cash flow was going to equal, out was going to equal in, and it actually took more like 11.
One bank that I went to, the loan officer was an old friend who used to be in the wine business, and he didn't laugh me out of the office, but yeah, he made it pretty clear that I was not the kind of person that was going to get a loan.
So Serena and I it's an 8-year plan before we really break even. And it's really, it's been much more expensive than we thought it would be. We're very lucky in that we've got some savings that we're spending. We haven't pulled a penny out of the operation yet. I'm on it full time, and she still has a full-time day job.
Mary is my partner, and if it wasn't for Mary, instead of maintaining a 200-pound frame, I probably would have been 130 pounds or something, because literally did not have the money to buy groceries. So it was very difficult, and finally, I'd say after 6 or 7 years, it started to work. I always tell people, don't quit your day job, which I did, and it would have been a lot easier if I had not.
So we killed ourselves to get the tasting room open last summer. Then we had to get the winery built because we had juice coming in. And then it was kind of the busy season with harvest, and the big sale season is end of the year. And we took a breather January, February, when I should have been out there hustling, knocking on doors. We end up closing the tasting room about 7, getting a meal, going to bed, and then we're out at perhaps Fledgate Vineyard at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then we're picking until 5, camping out while the fruit's delivered to the winery. Then we go in and do the crush. Somebody's got the tasting room open, or one of us breaks off to go get the tasting room open. And it's just kind of that doesn't happen every day, but there was a cycle of about a week last year where it was really all night, all day, all night, all day. And so those times really kind of just wear you down a little bit. And that's why I'm always, I feel lucky that I'm excited to do that work, or it would just be impossible.
A lot of times I would have a change of clothes in my truck and, at the park and ride lot, and I'd get off the bus, get into my truck, go straight to the facility to do, the nightly pump overs and punch downs, and not get home till maybe 11 p.m., 12 o'clock, and then have to get up 4 hours later and just do it all over again. So it was exhausting.
But neither of us were getting much sleep. So physically, emotionally, it was really, really trying the first 3 years.
I remember here reading an article in the Atlantic Monthly that he was quoted in maybe the month or 2 before he passed away, and it talked about wanting his winery to be a family legacy and being able to pass it down to his son. And I kind of took that as him telling me that a little bit later, and I thought, okay, we'll try to do this. And so I started calling like a lot of his best buddies and distributors and said, why would I do this? Why should I do this? What was different about what he was doing? And pretty much through the course of those conversations, I thought, okay, he was doing something different. He was pretty edgy. People really respected him. It's not a slam dunk. If I wanted to keep it going the way that he was doing it, and so I decided to do it.
When she first stepped into this huge, colossal challenge, she didn't know what the hell she was doing. She's explained that to me. She has no idea.
I didn't really have any fears because I didn't even understand what I was doing for the longest period of time. I honestly didn't know.
I think just knowing Janie, she's a very organized, directed, driven person. And that's important in any business, be able to do that. But my thought was like, wow, she's got another life and she has a family of her own. I mean, how is she going to, focus on this?
Janie now has grown the winery from 3,000 cases to 12,000 cases. She dove right in. I mean, it was pretty amazing.
I try to prepare everybody before I leave with groceries and try never to be gone when there's something important happening. I remember standing in the security line last year in Portland that was taking forever, that was threatening me missing my flight, which was the night of my kids' Christmas program. And, wondering, why did I do this?
Janie's very influential in my life. If I have any advice, I text her. If something's troubling me, I call her, something like that. So even though she is able to accomplish all these monumental things and juggle everything in her hand, like have kids, have a family, and then go tackle this wine industry, that's one thing, but she still has time just to talk to me, which I appreciate.
I think she just showed everyone that you just don't give up. I mean, Oregon winemakers were tough already, but when they saw Janie come through that and just continue to persevere, she could have just said, you know what, I'm heartbroken, this is over, it's done, but she didn't.
But the connection that I have to Jimmy through doing this, and to so many people that knew him and have kept him that present in my life, has been, I mean, I can't replace that. If I looked back and hadn't have done this and wouldn't have had all these times to sit around and talk to his friends and the people that knew him and hear a story, or it would be a big void, a really big void.
If I could just kind of go back and tell myself, don't worry about that fear. You'll be successful. You just have to trust you'll be successful. Yeah, you don't have anything to base it on, but just have a leap of faith. You'll be successful. I'd like to be able to go back and tell myself that.
We made it work. No matter how many issues we ran into, we somehow always resolved them, and Mike just never got tired of it. He just seemed to become more and more passionate about making the wine. So I couldn't help but support that passion.
Make sure that it's your passion and it's what you want to do. And if it is, you know, follow it. Don't listen to other people necessarily, because, you know, I did talk to quite a few winemakers and winery owners before we did this commercially, and I would say not one encouraged me to do it.
But I would encourage anybody, and I just think that if there's something that people want to do, they should do it and stick with it and don't give up.
Follow your heart, and if you truly believe that this is what you were put here to do, then do it, and you know, just keep at it.
Well, look, I'm 55 years old, and if I could start over, you know, one of the things I would say is do what I love. Do what I really love. I mean, even the technical stuff, I was good at it, but I can't say I really loved it, but you know, I was good at it. But if I could tell people, just do what you love, what you're really passionate about. Down to the cellular level. Again, something you're passionate. If you can do that, you're likely to succeed, because you'll do it really well.
We never thought of failure. We saw one problem after another as just a challenge. It's just something to overcome, and we'll get there. You know, and I don't think any of us at that point were in it for the money. I mean, we just really wanted. We had a passion to make this a really great wine growing region.
The people that are in this business that I've gotten to know are the most passionate, greatest people I've ever met.
It's fun to see like an order come in over the computer from somebody, you know, halfway across the country, and like wonder, you know, how'd you find us, and why do you want 2 cases of our wine, and like, thank you for giving us money so that we can get up tomorrow and do this. This is the most successful I've ever been in anything.
Anyway, you know, we're willing to do what it takes and we're going for it, but yeah, there's not really a plan B out there for us.
No, this is it.
If we weren't workaholics and didn't love the wine business as well as winemaking, and it would be ridiculous to try. But you know, we're coming up on the season where it's just going to be 24 hours a day, and it's like there's not a bit of dread in me. I mean, we're both really anxious to get moving, and the grapes are just stunning this year, so it's a really exciting time. But I think that if you didn't really love that pace, that it would probably grind you to a pulp pretty quickly. But you know, we know we're building something that hopefully will last and that we can do for many years.
I feel so fortunate to be able to do exactly what I love, what I'm passionate about every day of the week. I'm working probably way more hours than I ever have. I work 7 days a week, but in a way it's not really work to me.
If you have the real passion to make wine, there's no reason you can't do it. You just have to be willing to, again, give it your all, and that really means your all your resources, mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, whatever you got. I would say if it's your passion and you feel like you couldn't go another day in your life without doing it, then you've got to do it, and that's kind of the way I felt. I was just driven to do it.
There's no question that opening a bottle of wine is a magical act. You pull a cork and unlock a year's worth of weather, unravel millions of years of geology. But wine in America is more than that. It's about the absence of rules and the freedom to imagine. It's the understanding that the American dream isn't some abstract idea, but something you write for yourself, with the faith that if you choose to pursue it, you just might have a shot at achieving it.
There's something about wine that touches us deep in our hearts and grabs our emotions. And for that reason, I think you can really change people and move people through wine.
Wine has changed me and made me more gregarious, more interested in people, and more, yeah, if you want to know, more passionate, yeah.
I mean, I can tell you times when I've opened a bottle of wine, had a sniff, had a sip, and burst into tears.
You know, there's a ceremony to it, and you know, you peel the foil and pull the cork, and then you show somebody, and it's so much more interesting, not only for the person that's opening the bottle, but for the person you're sharing it with, if there's a story to tell.
It's a story. I mean, the whole way that it works and what it's used for and how it's consumed, and there's always a story.
I think if more people drank wine every day, the world would be a better place.
I think you should enjoy life so much more with wine on the table as opposed to no wine on the table. I can't imagine with no wine on the table. Dark ages again. The term wine growers is what we call ourselves, not winemaker, and we grow wine. It's a transition from the outside world of the vineyard to the inside world of the winery, but it's all one continuum, and you have to be on board for the whole trip.
One of my favorite books is Siddhartha, and in it, like the German writer said, you have to, man's greatest profession is to find a way into himself. And so like I read my dad's books, I read my dad's journals, kind of hoping that I can find some semblance of not being him, I know, to be my own person, but to kind of find what he liked, to kind of bring that part of his life back into mine, the part that I've been missing for so many years. And I'm not like trying to live in his footsteps, but I feel he's a good guide.
I feel like he's teaching me things. I feel like this whole experience has been a, you know what, little sister, you need to get more passionate about what you're doing and live for the right reason.
He unintentionally taught me that, you know, life is something that's precious. I mean, I'm not afraid to die, but I'm really afraid not to live.
Regular kind of office building, right? Even have a conference room. Even have a garbage can. And hidden inside is grape radio.